The minister had reached the question about lawful impediments when Lydia Vale looked past the man, waiting beside her, and found Everett Calder standing beneath the church gallery. He had one hand inside his coat, close to the pocket, where he kept the duplicate freight warrants that could ruin her name. Lydia turned back to Asa Calder. "Before you answer," she said, loud enough for every rancher, mule skinner, merchant, and creditor in the little adobe church to hear, "You ought to know I came to this valley for your brother." A woman near the aisle gasped. Everett's mouth bent with satisfaction. The groom only smiled. It was not a pleased smile. It was the brief, tired recognition of a man whose last uncertainty had finally been removed. "I know," Asa said. Then he faced the minister. "We require 5 minutes." He did not take Lydia's arm. He opened the vestry door and waited for her to choose whether to enter. Inside, their written agreement lay on a walnut table. 6 months of legal marriage, separate rooms, separate money, joint authority over Calder Relay accounts, and an unconditional rail fare east in Lydia's name. By Tuesday, a federal purchasing agent would decide whether Asa's horse and mule station kept its Army contract. By Wednesday, Everett intended to accuse Lydia of forging the warrants she had come to examine. Asa placed the unsigned marriage license beside the agreement. "If you still mean to do this," he said, "say why." "Your brother stole $9,000 from the Denver Women's Enterprise Fund. I mean to prove it. And if proving it destroys my station, then I will not lie to save it." Asa's smile disappeared, but he offered her the pen. "Good," he said. "Neither will I." Outside, Everett began telling the congregation that the wedding was over. Lydia signed the agreement first. Asa signed beneath her name, sanded the ink, and turned the page so Lydia could inspect every line again. She had written most of the terms herself in the parlor of Mrs. Baines's boarding house. Asa had altered only 3. Lydia would receive $40 a month as the station's accountant, whether the Army contract survived or failed. She would hold one of the 2 keys to the account room, and if either spouse ended the arrangement early, neither could interfere with the other's work, lodging, mail, or travel. The clause that had surprised or concerned the marriage bed. There would not be one. Asa had written, "The east room shall belong to Lydia Vale Calder alone. Asa Calder shall enter only by invitation or emergency. Your family name is not required in business," he added now. "Fuse Vale if you prefer." "I do." His expression tightened, as if the answer hurt, though it had been his offer. The practical reason for the marriage was uglier than the congregation understood. Everett owned a quarter interest in Calder Relay and had spent a year telling creditors that Asa was reckless, unmarried, and unable to keep books. He had also circulated a claim that Lydia, formerly the Enterprise Fund's senior clerk, had authorized the missing payments. A public marriage would not make her honest or Asa solvent, but it would make Everett's story harder to separate into 2 convenient scandals. It put Lydia inside the station, with contractual access to records. It let Asa present one set of corrected accounts before Tuesday's inspection. Most important, it forced Everett to attack them together. They had alternatives. Asa could sell his breeding mares to meet the shortfall and abandon the Army bid. Lydia could return to Denver, where Mrs. Harcourt had offered her a post at a new cooperative laundry. She could hand her evidence to a territorial marshal and hope a man with 3 counties to cover considered women investors urgent. Neither alternative recovered the money before Everett moved it again. "Why me?" Lydia asked. "Because you found the shortage when 3 bankmen called it weather loss. That is why you need my work. Why marry me?" Asa looked toward the closed vestry door. "Because Everett has made our names his shield." I would rather give you equal standing in the fight than ask you to hide in my house while I conduct it. That was the answer of a fair man. Lydia had learned to fear fair men, most when fairness cost them something. And why did you smile? Because if you had denied coming for Everett, I would have known not to marry you. She almost laughed. A peculiar foundation for domestic happiness. We are not contracting for happiness. There was their hidden assumption, though neither named it. Both believed affection could be kept outside an agreement if they behaved carefully enough. They returned to the church. Asa told the congregation that Lydia had come to investigate Everett's business conduct and that he supported her right to do so. The statement cost him at once. 2 freight customers left. His aunt covered her face. Everett stepped into the aisle. She has turned you against blood. No, Asa replied. The figures did that. The minister asked Lydia privately whether she wished to proceed. Mrs. Baines stood ready to take her home. Lydia's rail money remained locked in the boarding house safe, beyond Asa's reach. She looked at Everett, who believed every woman could be shamed into silence, then at Asa, who had just made himself poorer rather than speak for her. Proceed, she said. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Asa kissed no bride. He offered his hand only after Lydia offered hers. At the station house that evening, he placed an iron key and a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. The key opened the account room. The envelope held her first month's wages, paid in advance. The east room is upstairs, he said. The bolt turns cleanly. If it does not, I sleep in the barn until it does. Lydia tested it. The bolt turned cleanly. By sunrise, the valley had accepted a simpler version of the story. Asa Calder had married a sharp-faced Denver woman because his station was failing, and the woman had humiliated him at the altar because she preferred his handsome brother. Lydia found the tale useful. People spoke freely in front of women they considered ungrateful. At breakfast, however, the household refused simplicity. Asa took his coffee standing. Lydia moved the account ledger away from the bacon grease. Rosa Montoya, who cooked for the station crews and owned the small dairy herd behind the corrals, watched them negotiate cabinet shelves as if observing a border dispute. Mr. Calder keeps harness buckles in the flour drawer, Rosa told Lydia. Only new buckles. Flour does not care. Lydia assigned him a wooden box. Asa submitted with such grave obedience that she suspected mockery. Their first public performance came when purchasing agent Hollis arrived early. She expected a respectable household, orderly books, and 24 sound transport mules ready for inspection. Everett accompanied him without invitation. Asa introduced Lydia as Mrs. Calder, the station accountant. Lydia corrected him. Lydia Vale Calder in church records. Miss Vale in business. Hollis raised an eyebrow. Everett smiled. Asa merely said, Miss Vale keeps the accounts, and gave her the account room key in front of them all. That small surrender changed the room. Hollis began asking Lydia questions, instead of directing them through her husband. The books did not reward Asa's trust. 16 mule feed purchases carried duplicate warrant numbers. 4 were signed with Lydia's old Denver authorization mark, expertly imitated. Lydia's stomach went cold. The papers could make her look guilty, long before handwriting men or bank records cleared her. Everett leaned against the doorframe. A husband cannot be compelled to expose his wife's private papers. It was a clever offer disguised as a taunt. If Asa hid the warrants, Lydia might escape immediate accusation, and the station might keep its bid. Asa closed the ledger. Then he opened it again and pushed it toward Hollis. Copy every number you require. Everett's face hardened. That night, Lydia discovered her east room door standing open. She froze in the hall. Asa came up behind her, carrying a lamp, and stopped 3 steps away. "I did not enter," he said. "The wind catches it when the kitchen door opens." Fetched a screwdriver, removed the loose latch plate while she watched, and worked from the hallway. He did not cross the threshold. "You believed I had," he said. "For a moment. That moment belongs to something before me." It was not a question. Lydia was grateful enough not to answer. He tightened the final screw and set the tool on the floor inside her reach. "Test it." She shut the door. The latch held. At breakfast the next morning, his coffee sat untouched while he repaired a trace chain outside. Without deciding to, Lydia poured it into a covered tin cup and carried it to the corral. He accepted it with both hands. "No buckles in it," she said. His laugh was quiet and unexpectedly young. From the road, Everett watched them. The station's trouble was not merely stolen money. Half its working mules had developed raw shoulders from a new batch of army collars, and a lame team could fail Tuesday's inspection as surely as a false ledger. Asa knew animals. Lydia knew systems. Neither knowledge was sufficient. She spent a morning weighing feed, timing harness changes, and recording which teams returned rubbed. Asa dismissed her first conclusion. A column cannot feel a collar pinch. A hand cannot remember 48 animals without favoring the ones it likes. He bristled. She pushed harder, pleased by the precision of her argument and blind to the stable boys going silent around them. "Your memory is not evidence." Asa's jaw set. "And your evidence has no skin." He walked away. Lydia won the point and lost the cooperation she needed. By noon, 3 boys had stopped reporting small injuries for fear of becoming figures in a quarrel. Rosa found Lydia measuring a collar alone. "You make men feel foolish before you ask them to help you," she said. "Men have made women feel foolish for centuries. Then you know it does not improve the work." Lydia apologized to the crew before she apologized to Asa. She admitted that her record sheet had no place for the driver's observations and asked them to design one. Asa watched from the doorway. Later he brought her a rubbed leather pad and showed her how sweat marks revealed uneven pressure. She added a column for the mark, another for the driver's judgment, and a third for her measurement. Together they discovered the collars were cut correctly, but stuffed with cheap, shifting toe. Everett had approved the supplier. "He saved $80, Asa said, "and may cost you the bid." "Shoes," he corrected, then looked almost startled by the word. They rebuilt pads with wool from Rosa's cousin's flock. Lydia negotiated payment partly in cash and partly in winter hauling. Asa objected to promising station labor without consulting him. She slid the proposed terms across the table. "Then consult." They argued for 20 minutes and improved the bargain. It was their first major decision made jointly, not because the agreement required agreement, but because each had information the other lacked. Everett's warning arrived that afternoon in the hands of Sheriff Pike. A complaint alleged that Lydia had forged the feed warrants and used marriage to evade arrest. Pike was not eager to arrest her. He was equally unwilling to ignore bank paper bearing her mark. "I can allow 2 days for the federal man to finish," he said. "After that, I take the documents and Miss Vale to Alamosa." Asa stepped forward. Lydia touched his sleeve once. He stopped. "I will go if the sheriff requires it," she said. "But the original warrants remain in the account room until Mr. Hollis completes his copies. Sheriff, you may post a deputy at the door." Pike agreed. Asa did not overrule her. He did something more difficult. He asked what she needed. "A fast horse Monday morning," Lydia said, "and no one deciding I am safer uninformed." Done. That evening, Hollis questioned Asa about the marriage. Asa answered only matters concerning himself and the station. "Ask Miss Vale why she married," he said when Hollis pressed. Public loyalty, Lydia discovered, was not a man declaring her innocent. It was a man refusing to replace her voice with his. After supper, she found a second cup beside the ledger. Asa had remembered. She took coffee with a spoon of molasses when she worked past 9. She disliked how much that mattered. The first great reversal arrived in a canvas mail sack. Mrs. Harcourt's Denver packet contained bank impressions, investor receipts, and a telegram from the Enterprise Fund's directors. They had traced $6,000 into Everett's private purchase of water shares. More important, they had voted to employ Lydia as their Western examiner at $65 a month. Her appointment did not depend on the Calder marriage, first the station, or the outcome of Everett's complaint. Lydia now possessed a career, travel expenses, and institutional backing. The practical necessity of remaining Asa's wife weakened before either of them was ready. She found him in the breeding shed, wrapping the foreleg of a dun mare. His hands, so certain around nervous animals, shook once when she told him. "That is good work," he said. "It may take me to Pueblo, Santa Fe, perhaps Denver. Then it is good work in several places." He did not ask whether she would stay. His restraint should have relieved her. Instead, it felt like a door quietly closing. That afternoon, Asa failed in the domain he trusted most. The dun mare pulled against him when a freight wagon backfired, and he held the lead too long rather than admit he had lost her attention. She knocked him into a post and opened his shoulder to the bone. Lydia and Rosa stitched the wound under the station doctor's direction. Sa tried to rise before the bleeding stopped. "Lie down," Lydia said. "The North team has a foreman. The accounts have a clerk. The station is not proof of your usefulness every hour you breathe." She stared at her as though she had struck a hidden bruise. Later, feverish but lucid, he admitted why Everett's betrayal had gone so long unchallenged. Their father had died leaving debts and a demand that Asa keep both sons together. Asa had spent 15 years repairing Everett's bargains, paying his shortages, and calling it loyalty. "If I let him fall," Asa said, "I become the brother who broke the family. And if you keep catching him, I become the reason he never learns to stand." Lydia changed the bandage. Her competence usually protected her from tenderness. There was always a task to do. This time, her hand lingered against his uninjured shoulder. He looked at it, then at her. The room changed. Asa could have used pain, marriage, or gratitude to invite closeness. Instead, he said, "You need not stay. I know." She stayed until his fever broke. On Monday morning, Lydia rode to the bank with Pike's deputy. Asa, pale beneath his hat, watched her mount but did not send a man to follow. At the bank, she discovered the fact that changed everything. Everett had not taken the final $3,000 for himself. He had diverted it into overdue wages at 5 relay stations after Asa refused a ruinous railroad loan. 43 workers' families had eaten through winter because of money. Everett had stolen from women who had invested their own narrow savings. The theft remained theft. The benefit made it harder to punish cleanly. When Lydia returned, Asa was waiting beside the kitchen lamp. She had begun to anticipate that lamp without admitting it. "He saved your workers with our investors' money," she said. Asa closed his eyes. The marriage no longer had to survive. The moral collision did. Tuesday's inspection began before dawn. The rebuilt collars held. The corrected accounts did not. Hollis found the station operational, but financially compromised. He offered a conditional 90-day contract if Asa removed Everett from management, deposited collateral, and allowed monthly examination by an independent accountant. Miss Vale qualifies, Hollis said. Lydia answered before Asa could. Only if the board hires me separately and my employment survives any change in my marriage. Asa's mouth curved. Write it that way. They spent the afternoon planning routes. Lydia placed her Denver appointment beside the station's schedule, intending only to compare dates. If we shift the South Relay to Thursdays, she said, I can be back from Pueblo by. She stopped. Back. Asa heard it too. He bent over the map, granting her the mercy of not naming the future she had accidentally included him in. That night, the boundary between agreement and affection could no longer remain implied. They stood on the porch while autumn rain crossed the yard in silver lines. Asa's shoulder was healing. Lydia's hand rested on the rail between them. Our 6 months end in February, he said. Your new work means we could end sooner without harming either investigation. Do you want to? No. The honesty startled them both. But I will not ask you to remain under terms made when you had fewer choices, he continued. And I will not touch you because the minister said I may. Lydia turned her palm upward on the rail. What if I ask? He looked at her hand for a long moment before placing his fingers across it. It was less than an embrace and more intimate than the wedding. When he leaned nearer, he paused. Lydia closed the distance. Their first kiss was brief, rain-cool, and chosen twice, once when she lifted her face, again when he drew back and she caught the front of his coat. The kiss solved nothing. It made February dangerous. Everett escalated the next morning. He posted notices claiming ownership of the station's water shares and persuaded 3 relay keepers to refuse Asa's orders. His argument was not wholly false. He had used diverted money to prevent the stations from closing, and without those wages, the route might already be dead. Then he offered Lydia a bargain. Withdraw the forgery evidence, certify the transfers as emergency loans, and he would deed the water shares to the enterprise fund at their increased value. The women could recover more than they lost. The workers would keep their wages. Asa would keep the route. Everyone made whole, Everett said, except your pride. Lydia wanted to reject him. She also heard 43 families behind his words. She asked for 48 hours. That evening she told Asa everything. He did not praise her honesty. She disagreed with her hesitation. If we call theft a loan because it prospered, he said, we teach him to steal only when he expects a profit. And if we demand immediate prosecution, the bank freezes the stations. Men who never chose his crime lose winter work. The investors chose even less. For the first time, they stood on opposite sides of 2 defensible goods. Asa reached for the account room key, then stopped. Your key, he said. Your decision about the evidence. He left it in her hand. Lydia traveled to Alamosa to meet 2 enterprise fund directors. Before leaving, she and Asa agreed on one clear term. Neither would answer Everett's offer or surrender evidence without the other present. The directors divided at once. Mrs. Harcourt wanted prosecution. Mrs. Penn, whose entire savings lay in the fund, wanted the profitable water shares. Principle does not warm a widow's room, Mrs. Penn said. Lydia promised to return with a proposal that preserved both restitution and public accountability. While she was gone, a hard freeze split the station's main water flume. Everett's allied keepers blocked repair timber at the south yard. 30 teams stood without reliable water, and Hollis warned that the conditional Army contract would be withdrawn by morning. Everett came to Asa with a signed deed for the water shares and a confession limited to unauthorized borrowing. In exchange, he demanded that Asa characterize the forged warrants as emergency measures and urge the sheriff not to pursue a felony complaint. Saya had hours, not days. He imagined Lydia returning to a dead station, 43 men dismissed, and investors holding nothing but a criminal judgment against a brother, with no liquid money. He told himself he was choosing repair over vengeance. He signed. The water gates opened before midnight. The flume was repaired. The animals drank. Everett surrendered the shares. Lydia returned at dawn and saw the crews cheering Asa in the yard. He met her at the porch with the agreement in his hand. "I preserved the route," he said. She read his signature twice. "You used my findings to make a settlement, after promising not to answer without me. The flume failed. Then you could have saved the animals and refused to speak for the women. There was no time. There was time to write my name into your excuse." He had not signed for her, but he had used her marital position and partnership to give weight to a bargain she had not approved. The distinction mattered legally. It did not matter to the wound. Asa tried again. "They receive property worth more than the money, if they accept it. You decided value could replace their right to decide." His temper broke, not into violence, but into the raw voice of a man who had spent his life holding too much. "And what would you have had me do? Watch families starve, so everyone could remain perfectly innocent?" The yard went silent. Lydia's face changed. Asa heard his own mistake only after it had crossed the space between them. He had made her position sound clean, bloodless, indifferent to workers she had been trying to protect. She removed the account room key from her chain. For one terrible instant, he thought she would hand it to him. Instead, she placed it in her pocket. "The records remain under joint seal until the fund votes," she said. "I am moving to Mrs. Baines. My wages are due through today. Our public marriage will continue only until the sheriff confirms that ending it cannot be used against the evidence." She went upstairs and packed. C stood below, unable to ask her to stay without repeating the offense. Everett appeared at the gate, satisfied. Asa crossed the yard and gave him the settlement back. "You won the water," he said. "You have not won my silence." But Lydia had already left. Lydia's independent life did not collapse. She rented Mrs. Baines's rear room, traveled for the enterprise fund, and earned more than the station paid her. She completed an audit of 2 Pueblo cooperatives and sent her findings directly to their boards. No husband opened her mail. No ranch determined her route. She was safe, solvent, and miserable at 9 each evening when no second cup appeared beside her ledger. Asa functioned too. He hired an elderly bookkeeper named Mr. Choate, who disliked horses and loved exact columns. Asa paid him properly, cooked badly, and stopped leaving harness pieces in the flour drawer. The station survived week by week, not comfortably. He did not visit Lydia for 10 days. First, he corrected the public record. At the church meeting, he stated that Lydia had not authorized the settlement, that he had broken their written term, and that the responsibility was his alone. He sent the same statement to Hollis, Pike, and every enterprise fund director. The admission endangered the Army contract and weakened his claim that the station possessed reliable management. Next, he placed his controlling station interest in temporary trust pending an independent vote. Everett could no longer use Asa's authority as family protection. Neither could Asa. Finally, he sold the racing stallion he had bred for 7 years. With the proceeds, he funded 3 things: water hauling if the shares remained disputed, 2 months of worker wages if the route stopped, and Lydia's legal expenses without condition of return or reconciliation. Rosa called the sale foolish. Probably, Asa said. Few loved that horse. That is why selling him counts. Everett suffered consequence as well. Sheriff Pike refused to treat the confession as complete, and Mrs. Harcourt insisted on a public accounting. Yet Everett's water share deed created genuine recovery. Some investors began defending him, not because they trusted him, but because punishment could reduce the value of what he had returned. The apparent villain had forced a question no clean verdict answered. Mrs. Penn came to the boarding house before Asa did. She was 63, a laundress's widow, and had invested $200, saved a quarter at a time. Lydia expected her to demand Everett's imprisonment. Instead, Mrs. Penn placed a grocery account on the parlor table. "My shares may be worth $300 now," she said. "If the court takes the water and sells it badly, they may be worth $60. Justice conducted without arithmetic is another luxury poor women cannot afford." "Then you would forgive him." "I said nothing about forgiveness. I said I want my money." That distinction followed Lydia through the day. At the station, Rosa challenged Asa from the opposite direction. Her cousin's wool had saved the mule collars, and 3 of her nephews worked the South Relay. She would suffer if the route failed. "You believe selling the stallion makes your decision clean?" she asked. "No." "Good. Because sacrifice can be another way a man keeps control. He pays enough, hurts enough, and expects everyone to accept the ending he selected." Asa leaned against the empty stall. "What would you have me do?" "Pay the cost. Then stop arranging what Lydia must feel about it." For once, he did not defend himself. Mrs. Penn and Rosa wanted different outcomes. Neither served as the couple's approving chorus, and neither allowed Lydia or Asa the comfort of believing restitution had only one shape. When the enterprise fund directors scheduled their vote, Lydia asked that investors hear the station payroll figures, as well as the forged warrants. Asa sent the figures without comment and declined the invitation to attend unless the women requested him. The pressure was no longer a contest between Lydia's evidence and Everett's excuse. It had become a public choice among people who would bear unequal parts of the loss. When Asa finally came to the boarding house, Lydia received him in the front parlor with the door open. He did not bring flowers, a ring, or a new contract. "I made the choice I feared you would not make," he said. "I called that protection. It was control. I broke the term because I trusted my urgency more than your judgment. Then I accused you of caring less for the workers when you were trying to protect both them and the investors." Lydia said nothing. "The settlement is suspended until the fund votes. My station share is in trust. Your legal costs are paid whether you testify against Everett, accept the deed, leave Colorado, or never speak to me again." And the stallion. Sold. She knew what that animal had meant. His first successful breeding line. The one part of the station wholly shaped by his own hands rather than inherited from his father. You should not have sold him for an apology. I did not. I sold him so the workers could survive long enough for you and the fund to choose freely. That answer hurt more than a plea would have. He placed no demand on the silence. At the door, Lydia asked, "If I do not return, what becomes of us?" "You decide when the evidence is safe. I will sign whatever lawful separation can be managed. The station will employ you only if you want the work. I will not purchase forgiveness with either marriage or wages." He left. That night, Lydia saw no lamp in the Calder kitchen from her boarding house window. For the first time, she understood that Asa had not left it burning because he feared the dark. The enterprise fund vote took place in the Alamosa Assembly Room under a ceiling stained by coal smoke. Fed offered the water shares, full records, and 5 years of payments from his quarter interest in the station. In return, he asked the investors to support a reduced criminal charge and allow the relay keepers to remain employed. Mrs. Harcourt demanded trial. Mrs. Penn demanded restitution. Lydia proposed a third course. The fund would accept the shares only after independent valuation. Everett would make a public confession, naming the forged warrants and clearing Lydia. His station interest would fund repayment. The women would not promise him immunity. They would merely state to the prosecutor that restitution and worker stability mattered in sentencing. It was morally untidy and economically honest. The vote passed by 1. Everett rejected it. He had expected family negotiation, not public confession. In anger, he ordered the southern gate closed and claimed the water shares could not transfer without his wife's dower release. The claim was uncertain, the marriage long estranged, and the delay real enough to break the station before a court clarified anything. His wife, Margaret, entered from the rear of the room. Everett had invoked her legal interest for years, while keeping her away from every account. Lydia had found her, not through a hidden letter, but through wage rolls at a boarding house in Pueblo, where Margaret worked as a dress cutter. Margaret did not come to rescue Lydia or punish Everett. She came for her own price. "I will sign no release," she said, "until my unpaid work and my original $500 inheritance are recognized." Everett called it extortion. Asa surprised everyone by agreeing with Margaret. Recognizing her claim would cost the Calder station a valuable strip of irrigated pasture. Without it, the relay must reduce teams and abandon its most profitable southern run. She put her money in 12 years into what we called family property, Asa said. "We do not cure one theft by continuing another." It was changed behavior under the same pressure. Land or honesty. This time Asa did not choose for the women. He accepted the loss. Everett's alliance broke. 2 relay keepers opened the gates. Margaret signed after receiving a recorded interest and separate counsel. The fund took the water shares. Pike carried Everett's confession to the territorial prosecutor, who would decide the charge, rather decide that Varks but then privately with the Calders. The station retained the Army contract, but lost the South Run, 12 teams, and nearly a third of its income. 20 workers stayed. Others received 2 months' pay and references. After the assembly emptied, Asa handed Lydia a document. It ended their 6-month agreement immediately. Her wages, evidence, appointment, rail money, and account access remained hers. It made no request for marriage, partnership, or return. "You are free before you answer anything," he said. Lydia read it at the same walnut table where the fund had voted. "I am not ready to forgive the choice you made." Pain crossed his face. "I know. See, I may understand it for the rest of my life and still think it was wrong. I know that too, and I will not come back as your accountant wife. I will keep the fund appointment. I will travel. The station may contract with me by the quarter. Large decisions require 2 signatures. My earnings remain mine. Household expenses are written plainly. Neither of us speaks for the other's work." Asa listened, without reaching for hope too soon. "Separate rooms?" he asked. Until invited. "Your name?" "Vale in business. Calder, when I choose it." "Everett. You may love him. You may not clean his consequences." Asa nodded. Lydia removed the account room key from her pocket. She had carried it every day of their separation, not as his property, but as proof that she had not surrendered her work. She set it between them. "That key opens a room at your station," she said. "It does not open your house." "No." She turned her hand palm upward beside it, repeating the gesture from the rainy porch. "Ask me home." His breath left him slowly. "Lydia Vale, will you come home and decide, day by day, whether our legal marriage can become an honest one?" "Yes." He placed his hand in hers. She chose the kiss that followed. They did not hold a second wedding. The first had been legal, public, and incomplete. What replaced the contract was quieter and harder. Recorded business terms, separate earnings, 2 signatures for debt or land, quarterly work agreements, private correspondence, and the continuing right to travel. Lydia returned to the East Room. Asa continued downstairs. 3 weeks later, she invited him across the threshold for coffee. A month after that, she asked him to stay. No clause compelled either moment. Everett pleaded to a reduced charge after the prosecutor weighed his confession, restitution, forged instruments, and the workers' dependents. He served time in the county jail and lost management authority. Some people believed he had been treated too gently because his theft saved jobs. Others believed any prison term ignored the families he had fed. Lydia never found a judgment that satisfied every value. Margaret kept her irrigated acreage and leased water to the station at a fair rate. She did not reconcile with Everett. Rosa expanded her dairy herd onto part of the reduced pasture and paid rent directly into the station accounts. The Army contract remained, smaller but clean. Sia grieved the South Run and the stallion. Love did not restore either. Lydia traveled twice a month, sometimes sleeping in Pueblo or Denver. Asa disliked the empty evenings and never made that dislike her chain. On the first anniversary of the altar confession, Hollis arrived for an audit and found Lydia and Asa at the kitchen work table. 2 ledgers lay open. One belonged to the Enterprise Fund. The other belonged to Calder Relay. Between them sat a household book with 2 columns of earnings and 1 agreed column of expenses. Asa reached toward Lydia's ledger, then stopped. "May I?" She turned it toward him. The question was ordinary. That was why it mattered. After Hollis left, Lydia took the old 6-month agreement from the walnut box. They did not burn it. Burning would have pretended the flawed beginning had never protected her. Instead, they filed it behind the new partnership terms. Asa placed his account room key on the table. Lydia put hers beside it. The keys were not symbols of belonging. They were tools held by 2 people answerable to one another. "Do you regret telling the church you came for Everett?" he asked. "No. Do you regret smiling?" "Frequently." Everyone thought I was pleased. "Were you?" "Fanzin," he considered. "I was relieved you had told the most dangerous truth before asking me to trust you." Lydia closed the household book. "And then you learned that one truth does not purchase all the others." Slowly. She leaned across the equal space between their chairs and kissed him. Outside, 20 teams moved north beneath a clear winter sky. Fewer than before. Enough to keep the station alive. In the account room, Margaret's lease, the fund's shares, the workers' wages, and Lydia's quarterly fee each had its own line. Asa opened the kitchen drawer, found a harness buckle beside the flour scoop, and looked guilty. Lydia laughed so hard she had to sit down. He removed the buckle, swept the flour from it, and wrote himself a note on the household board. That evening, they balanced the station books together. Lydia signed Lydia Vale beneath the fund figures. Asa signed his name beneath the relay totals. On the next page, where they had planned spring repairs and 2 weeks of shared travel, both names appeared side by side. Not because a minister had joined them. Because after the need, the anger, the cost, and the open door, they still chose the same future and left room in it for 2 whole lives. Whether Lydia was right to remain after Asa broke their clearest term depended on what forgiveness was meant to honor, the harm that could not be undone, or the costly change that followed it. The ledger gave no answer. It only showed that neither of them would ever make such a choice alone. Again. Was Lydia right to rebuild the marriage after Asa saved the workers by breaking his promise? Or should one act of control have ended it for good?